From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Thank you for joining the McLaughlin Group, a show where friends disagree agreeably. I'm your host, Tom Rogan. This week, we'll dive into John Bolton's breach of President Trump's impeachment defences, Britain's Brexit day and the EU's future. Our panellists are author and columnist Pat Buchanan, Eleanor Clift of the Daily Beast, Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune, and the Washington Examiner's Tiana Lowe. Okay, let's get to issue 1, Bolton's breach.
Reject my argument that abuse of power would destroy the impeachment criteria of the Constitution.
The impeachment trial of President Trump continued this week with passionate arguments, and it gained a new quality with the New York Times report that John Bolton's upcoming book undermines the president's defense. Bolton's book will supposedly suggest that the president withheld aid to Ukraine towards extracting Ukraine's investigations of Joe and Hunter Biden. Why does Bolton matter? Well, because he was National Security Advisor during the relevant period.
Pat, has John Bolton breached the carefully laid defences?
No, not at all. I mean, I think his testimony as he describes it is irrelevant and redundant. There's a lot of people that believe the aid to Ukraine and the meeting with Ukraine were held up deliberately in order to get Ukraine to come along and do an investigation of Biden. But even Republicans who accept that argument say, look, it's not a crime, it's not collusion, it's not conspiracy, it's not treason, it's not bribery, it doesn't rise to the level of an impeachable offense. More than that, what is going on here is this is being used by an all-Democratic House, all-Democratic Senate, or unanimous by that party, to overturn the election of 2016, to remove the president, moreover, more importantly, to deny the American people the right to decide this issue and whether Trump deserves election. And the Republican majority has stood up and said no to that, let the people decide.
Eleanor?
Well, the fix has been in from the beginning that this president is going to be acquitted. So I don't think that's really an issue. But to call the National Security Advisor, who was there at the scene of the crime, if you will, who's coming out with a book that says, in the room where it happened, to say that he should not be allowed to present his testimony to an impeachment trial that revolves around these very issues where the Republican defense has been claiming there are no first-hand witnesses. That's why the case is not legitimate. So we will hear from John Bolton. He is a savvy, bureaucratic player. He's also one of yours, one of the Republican rights, and he's probably now burnt his bridges with the Republicans. But if his book is going to come out, let's see if the White House tries to shut down the publication. I don't know that they can claim classified, but they're probably going to try. But we're going to hear from him, and the Republicans who voted to not hear from him will be wearing that as an anvil around their chest going into 2020.
Tiana, isn't there a difficulty for Republicans that even if they vote to sort of protect the president from witnesses, etc., and pursue the narrative that Pat has suggested, the vision, the narrative of John Bolton being obviously integral to the White House and very obviously prevented from or obstructed from testifying, that poses its own public relations problem prospectively with independent voters moving towards the election? Or do independent voters care about the economy?
Well, no, it absolutely is a strategic error on Republicans' part if they do not allow Bolton to be called as a witness, simply because you don't want Bolton leaking as an October surprise. You have two elements at play here. On the one hand, Mitch McConnell has to protect his Senate. That's not possible if Susan Collins gets punished at the ballot box for not allowing this witness. If those voters in her state, which value independence, view this as a trial where the fix was already in, they won't reward her, and McConnell could lose a very crucial seat. On the second element is maintaining the presidency. If you are all in Trump 2020, I don't know why you would want the Bolton story to percolate throughout this election when it could go on during this impeachment trial that very few Americans are actually tuned into.
So you just say swallow the bitter pill now?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, Republicans do have a theoretical argument that if Democrats wanted Bolton subpoenaed, they could have actually done it and then potentially lobbed an actual obstruction of justice charge against Trump, not this bogus obstruction of Congress charge. But we aren't operating in theory right now. We are operating in the pragmatics of what matters in November. And I just think that Republicans are missing an opportunity here.
Clarence?
I'm not sure if Pat would say that Bolton was one of theirs.
Yeah. Pat and Bolton's foreign policy views are slightly...
Hardcore hardliner during the Cold War, but he's been interventionist,
Right.
which I have not.
Yes.
Right.
But
I just want to clarify
yeah.
that. I think that what's interesting to me is how the public, if you believe the polls at all, overwhelmingly wants witnesses. And we know that the public is just about 50-50 divided on other issues as far as the president's guilt and all, or whether he ought to be impeached. But Americans want the evidence to be opened up. They want this process to be as transparent as it can be. And that doesn't look well for McConnell. I understand he wants to cover his bases and backside here.
Let me interrupt you. Look, Clarence,
Go ahead.
The Republicans are going to celebrate this acquittal as a smashing victory over Nancy Pelosi. The Democrats put all in to try to impeach this guy, get witnesses, damage and destroy him, and Trump's going to celebrate a victory at the State of the Union. Watch that.
Okay.
There'll be
We expect
cheers,
that.
roars on
Everybody
one side of
expects
the
that.
aisle, and I think silence maybe on the other. But there's no doubt about it. This is a massive defeat for the Democratic Party. For 3 years, it's been trying to overthrow this guy, and now these Republicans said, let the American people decide. The American people, I think, will agree with that.
I
Let me
don't
ask you,
think it's
how big of an embarrassment for the
no.
Republican Party is it?
I think look, it is a matter that got to the Senate of the United States, but it was turned back because it was a totally partisan effort. Every Democrat has said it's got to be bipartisan.
Eleanor.
If you impeach,
It's not a massive defeat for the Democratic Party. Lamar Alexander, who was the fourth vote who decided that he would not support witnesses, basically said the case was proved. The American people have seen this all put out there before. Nobody's arguing with the facts. And more information is going to keep coming out. What we know about the Bolton book is supposedly the tip of the iceberg, and I think you're right that the Republicans are going to have to defend this for the rest of this year. It may be a temporary win for the president, but he goes down as an impeached president,
Okay.
and
Let
an
her
impeached
finish.
president who is cleared by a partisan trial which refused to allow key information to be reviewed.
do you think it's going to be a hard sell for the Republican senators to say, look, we know what was done and what was alleged, we disagree or agree with this. Our final analysis is a partisan Democratic Senate should not impeach and remove a president. You, the American people, should decide whether or not he goes.
That's fair enough.
Okay.
But
That's exactly what you got.
But the information that came out in the trial will be aired for the rest of this year.
Been aired.
All right. Let's take a slightly different angle. Some big news coming up next week from a little place named Iowa. Tiana, what do you think about the lay of the land as we approach the Iowa caucuses?
So Iowa is obviously unique because it requires a lot of enthusiasm to go drive and physically caucus. Right now, everyone's talking about this Bernie surge, and I'm not denying it, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but look, Joe Biden has been the front runner of this race for a year. And he's doing this as not a great campaigner. He's doing this while taking all the hits. And obviously the media has this fix-in that's against Bernie and for Warren, but I do think that we could face a very splintered vote where everyone overplays who comes out as the marginal front runner. But it's Amy Klobuchar, very realistically, pick up delegates in Iowa. And you could come out of a scenario where you have 5 different candidates who all have acquired a non-zero amount of delegates.
Let's go to Clarence.
Why are the media pro-Bernie? This is news.
Pro-Warren.
Pro-Warren.
Well, why are the media pro-Warren? I mean, I don't understand this business about media bias for Elizabeth Warren.
You don't. Well, I think partly because of that last debate where CNN, the CNN reporter, probably accidentally, seemed to endorse Elizabeth Warren over Bernie Sanders.
Well, the conspiracy
Iowa
is uncovered now.
It
My
is.
goodness. I mean, I didn't get my marching orders from the.
Iowa is an expectations game, and Joe Biden has successfully kept down expectations. And in these last week or so, we've hearing about the Bernie surge, and you do have the moderate Democrats who are worried about Bernie sweeping perhaps the first 3 contests, finally coming out and reminding people of all the ammo that the Trump team would have against him. I think the likely result is probably you're correct, not a clear win for anyone. 300,000 people would be a huge turnout in Iowa. Somebody could claim I got more delegates. Someone could claim I got more of the raw vote. Somebody could say I won the rural counties. I think you're going to have a lot of people declaring victory.
So it won't decide anything.
No.
Tell it to Howard Dean, for heaven's sakes.
Yeehaw!
If Bernie wins Iowa, I think he will win New Hampshire. If he then wins Nevada, Biden could collapse, and the only thing standing between Bernie and the nomination is the billions of Mike Bloomberg.
You know, that's not an absolutely uncertain outcome, but
I think it'll be a wonderful outcome.
If Sanders wins New Hampshire, he's from the neighboring state. Paul Tsongas won New Hampshire in 1992, and Bill Clinton, who came in second, declared himself the comeback. Excuse me, 1976, Jimmy Carter came in behind uncommitted, and an article in the elite press by Johnny Apple declared him the winner.
Wait.
This is a long way away before people like Pat Buchanan.
I'll come to you, Pat.
Excuse me,
Pat,
I get
I'll
to
come
finish before Pat Buchanan can declare Sanders the victory. The Trump team has called him our ideal candidate, and that's going to sink into some Democrats, not the Bernie stalwarts, but there are other Democrats.
I was in New Hampshire with Tsongas and with Clinton, and Tsongas won. And the reason we knew Tsongas wasn't going anywhere because he was a regional candidate quintessentially, whereas Clinton could go south to his strength. Now, Bernie has gone national. He's got a huge national organization, and all these folks there, I don't know anybody who can really match it. And look, he may get beaten in Iowa, but if he wins there and the momentum carries him through New Hampshire and then Nevada, I think there's going to be total panic in the Democratic establishment, and it's starting right now.
There's already panic. He will be one of the finalists.
Yes, Clarence, do you think that the real risk here for Democrats prospectively is that Bernie Sanders does very well and then is seen by a consolidation of perhaps the more establishment Democrats to be pushed out, to isolated, and that his supporters don't turn out in November?
Oh, yeah, I've had Bernie supporters say that. And of course, that in a way is kind of what happened last time around when a lot of them felt that the system was rigged. And there was some suspicious counting going on there. I think the establishment, such as is left of it, is being very cautious about avoiding that kind of a scenario, although I do know a lot of moderates who are concerned about the Bernie rise. So we'll see how that plays out.
He's basically gotten a free ride because the other candidates don't want to attack him because they know he's going to be in the race till the end. He's got the support, the resources, and the staying power, and they figure they're going to get his delegates. And so he's gotten this free ride. But if he should get the nomination, I think you're going to see Democrats line up and say, okay, he's going to bring new people into the voting process, and they're going to be for him. Third Way, which is a moderate Democratic group, they've put out all of the stuff negative about Sanders, but they say if he wins, we're going to salute and be behind him.
Concluding
That's
comment,
the difference.
I mean, we saw a Never Trump voting coalition that was sizable in 2016. I think that there would be a Never Bernie coalition, and the one reason why I do think that Bernie would be a compelling candidate because of his specific Rust Belt appeal. But the real issue with Bernie is that he turns this election into a referendum against socialism, not a referendum against Trump's personal ability.
Okay, moving on. Issue 2, Bon Voyage, Britannia.
And we'll look forward in the future to working with you as sovereign.
If you disobey the rules, you get cut off. Could we please remove the flags? Please sit down, resume your seats, put your flags away, you're leaving, and take them with you if you are leaving now. And goodbye.
With heated exchanges between Nigel Farage and European parliamentarians, on Friday, Britain left the European Union. So ends a saga that began in June 2016 with Britain's referendum leave vote. Brexit is a key victory for Conservative Prime Minister Boris Johnson, but hard work remains. Britain and the EU will now attempt to negotiate a post-Brexit trade deal.
Eleanor, do you think that the Brexit actuation as it has now occurred after June 2016's vote, will lead to more populist movements rising up to try and challenge a return to power to whatever they see as their base?
Well, the parliamentarians linked arms and sang Auld Lang Syne to say goodbye to the UK. And I think what happens next is what the other populist movements will be watching to see. I think the UK is going to pay a big price here. You already have J.P. Morgan Chase moving their headquarters out of London to Paris. You've got young people are going to have to come to grips with the idea that they can't have their European passport and go everywhere. These are now 27 member countries, and the UK has withdrawn from Europe. I don't think that's economically they're going to take a hit. Culturally, they're going to feel isolated. I think other movements are going to look at this and say, okay, we're going to go forward, but I think the general population is not going to be for it. And it's going to depend on whether the EU can really strike a hard bargain with the UK. If the UK gets trade deals and everything else, so it doesn't make a big deal that they're not part of the EU, that'll send a signal that will encourage other movements.
And Pat, that is the challenge, isn't it, for the British government as they enter these trade negotiations, that the European Union has a manifest interest in trying to make this trade deal pretty painful for Britain to try and deter prospective other...
Well, I wonder if they're going to... The real force to break up the EU comes from populists and nationalists all across the continent. In Britain, of course, they're north of London, all the way up to the Scottish border. They're secessionists in Scotland, secessionists in Catalonia. I think the driving force, the more powerful force, is not transnationalism of Macron and Merkel anymore. I think it's the breakup idea, the idea of splitting, the idea of joining with tribes, tribalism, etc. And I think that is dominant, quite frankly, and I think Europe is breaking up.
Okay, Tiana?
So I know that everyone's focused on sort of the emotional resonance of it and the political effect that it will have. But realistically, the economic ramifications could work in the nationalists' benefit. Right now, Britain obviously has its own central bank, but even though the Bank of England has positive interest rates, the effective interest rates in the UK are negative. And we see this is what Europe wants. The European Central Bank has said they will maintain negative interest rates. And we already know this is an experiment. It's failing in Japan, it's failing across Europe, but they will insist on keeping that. So I think that as their economy begins to plummet, and now Britain is sort of unshackled from this very negative financial relationship, as they rebound, I think that could be a good selling case for these nationalist movements.
It's an interesting point, Clarence.
Yeah, well, I expect there to be, and we're already seeing some backlash occur as people find, as the dream hits reality, because this sort of thing, implementation is always the difficult challenge, and we're seeing a lot of grumbling happening already, and a lot of confusion. In the long run, this may hold, but in the short run, it's going to be a bumpy ride.
Yeah, Boris Johnson is going to try to cozy up to Donald Trump to try to get a really super good trade deal here. But, UK can't replace what it loses in trade with the European Union. It can't replace that with what they get here until they build a channel between London and New York.
Yeah.
I don't think that's in the offing.
Everybody's talking about economics, and economics obviously is important. What is economic man and all the rest of it. But what is really driving people are issues of the heart. To whom, what people do we belong? What is life, what ideas of community and things like that, rather than, am I going to get this out of that? And that's what's driving people. And I think it's misunderstood and still not misunderstood.
I think that's
let Pat finish. I'll come to you.
Look, let's go. What is the main issue in Europe? It's the massive immigration from across the Mediterranean, or the threat of it, which they feel imperils who they are. And that's not going to stop.
That's an insidious argument. That's a poisonous argument. I don't think it is an accurate one. It's one that the politicians have exploited. And basically, I think it is about economics. I think the people in the UK thought they were going to get a better deal out of the public health service because they're going to, all this money that allegedly was going to immigrants is going to go for them. They're going to see this isn't going to happen. And what you talk about, the purity of who we are, in a global world,
All right,
Those
explain.
Well, let Eleanor
lines
finish.
cannot
Let
be
me ask you a
drawn
question.
Enough. I'll come back to you, Pat.
Those lines cannot be drawn as starkly as you would
Look,
like.
what is going on? Look at Catalonia. Why do you think Catalonia wants to secede from Spain?
Because
They're
they
the richest
produce
part of
the
Spain.
I'll
majority
come to you
of
to-
the
yeah.
nation's economic output.
I mean,
They have a free rider issue.
it's all economics. Are you kidding?
Well, surely culture is an important factor. So was Cambridge Analytics in getting Brexit passed because they were able to target people who were grumbling about how things are changing. This isn't the country I used
But
to
you
know.
know,
And the same
Clarence-
techniques
We'll let
were
Clarence
used
finish,
to
then I'll
help Donald Trump's campaign. And we need to be aware of how you can target market your candidates or your proposition much more effectively than you used to be able to. And now, as I say, reality is starting to hit the fan. A lot of people
I
didn't
know
like
the
those
economics-
immigrants, want those immigrants to come in and help take care of their
All right, if
elderly
all
in the
the
hospitals,
economics
et cetera,
are in
et cetera.
favor of the EU, what is driving what is going on in Hungary, what is going on in Poland, what is going on, frankly, in
Demagoguery
Israel,
to some degree.
where it's now a Jewish homeland? Around the world, take a look at the leaders of the four most powerful countries, or largest on earth: China, India, the United States, Russia. All of them are led by autocratic individuals
The Chinese don't really
who
have a choice in
represent
that,
represent
All right.
the majority of the people.
I think there
I
is some
don't think Trump represents a
We're gonna
majority of
find
the
that
people.
out.
He won
All
with
right.
46.1% of the vote.
All right.
He's president.
All right, there are some
Not for
shared.
long.
Wait, enough. There are some shared points here. I think it blends, right? Economic incentives. Do I lead a better life day to day is important, as is national identity. So you saw that with the waving of the flags. On another issue this week, Tiana, which is interesting that the Trump administration didn't get too upset about it. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in London. The British government said that they would allow Huawei to build out their 5G network. That is a concern because Huawei is it's a Chinese intelligence cutout, and the Trump administration does not want people using Huawei. How do you see that challenge? America's closest ally pretty starkly saying, actually, America, we're going to go with the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, this is one of the issues where Trump needs to pick and choose his salience better when it comes to these trade wars, because this is a big deal, and these are totally viable grounds to cut off some national security communications with the UK, because we already know that under 2017 law, Huawei, although it calls itself a private company as of last year, they are legally obligated to share intelligence with the Chinese dictatorship if China wants it. So they report back to Beijing. This is not a private company by any realistic measure. So yes, Trump is, Boris Johnson said that Huawei won't be it'll be involved in antennas. It won't be involved in any sensitive apparatus. I don't think that they understand the cybersecurity threat and just purely how advanced Huawei has become and how purely advanced the Chinese government has become.
Huawei goes right to the issue of what is China? Is China a tough, rough player in the global economy that tries tough tactics in trade, or is it a great power which is seeking basically to displace the United States any way it can as the first power on earth, including a lot of things that do damage to America? What is it? And once you got that answer, you can answer the question of how we should deal with it.
Well, one question is, when we speak of China as a communist country, their system is state capitalism. It's just so happens that the state is the chief capitalist. But you're absolutely right. They are still beholden to the government and must turn over whatever the government wants when they want it. So times like this is when the communist label is very significant.
I would point out that China has its hands full right now trying to control a global epidemic, which is already outside of its borders, which is something that reminds us all that we are one world. We are when it comes to fighting stuff like this. Yes.
Although ironically, when it comes to a quarantine,
you think the Chinese see themselves and us as one?
I said they're fighting a global epidemic.
I know what they're doing.
All right,
that has to be dealt with across international lines. We are not impervious.
Okay, I think Eleanor's point was value sets. Pat. All right, predictions. Pat.
I think Trump will celebrate a massive victory this weekend. Bernie will win the Iowa caucuses, and there will be a sensational State of the Union address early next week.
Okay.
I was going to predict also the State of the Union. The Trump can't help himself to turn that into a huge victory rally, which will nauseate at least half of America. And so get ready
And
for
half
a
of this
rough
panel.
ride. He feels entitled to do whatever it takes to win the election. Look for him to court more foreign influence in the election.
Okay, Tiana.
I think one, momentum. I think that Amy Klobuchar will overperform the polls in Iowa. I think Biden and Bernie will have a virtual draw in Iowa. And I think that Trump will manage to troll his opponents into booing down the strike of Soleimani and his Palestinian peace plan at the State of the Union.
Okay.
Did you say Trump will troll his opponents? There's a safe prediction. I've heard one. How about Bernie wins Iowa, Elizabeth Warren wins New Hampshire, and Joe Biden wins South Carolina, and then we're heading off toward Bloomberg Tuesday.
Okay.
Once we get past, because we got Nevada in the way there, right?
Okay. I predict that the British government will live to regret Huawei. Their own GCHQ said Huawei is built with backdoors to the Chinese Ministry of State Security. Boris Johnson wanted the cheap option. Thank you for watching. Remember, the discussion continues at McLaughlin.com. And check out our podcast on iTunes. We're in the modern era, exciting as it is. See you next time.